You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hi, my name's Vincent, and I want to let you know this episode is brought to you by Chase Bliss Audio, makers of the finest effects pedals. Joel and the team work very hard to ensure you have all the tools of tone you need, whether you need an advanced reverb or an expressive looping device. Chase Bliss has you covered. Make sure that you check out all their fine products at chaseblissaudio.com. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the show.
If you're a listener of this podcast, my assumption is you've probably considered doing some recording. Maybe you want to cut a demo with your band. Maybe you're producing some independent electronic music. Maybe you're the next bedroom pop success, or maybe you're going to start your own podcast. Whatever your recording endeavor, I would highly suggest that you scope out the Focusrite line of products. Not only are they sponsoring this podcast, but I have used them for years, long before they were a sponsor. In fact, pretty much every episode of this podcast since episode 70 or so has been recorded using a Focusrite product of some variety. I'm currently talking to you through a Scarlett 18i20, but you won't go wrong with any of their interfaces or any of their other products, and you can scope out the full line at sweetwater.com today, and you will be very, very glad you did. What is up, good people? Welcome to today's episode. Today, I am talking to my dude, Mr. Scott Hamilton, who I've been meaning to get on this show for quite some time. He is one of the hosts of the Effects Loop podcast and an actual acoustical engineer, so he knows how this stuff works, whereas I sit here and go, I think mahogany is a tone wood that imparts certain woody characteristics to your sound. Yeah, this guy actually knows about spaces and how to engineer them to perform in a certain way and how to isolate your spaces and all this stuff. And we get into some high-level overview of all of that and his background and blah, blah, blah. It's a really, really nerdy, wonderful episode, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. And if you want to hear him and some other folks from the guitar podcast universe, Chris Carter, Jonathan Diaz, these folks have been supporters and listeners of this podcast and many of the other guitar podcasts for years and years and years. In fact, which we get into on this episode, Jonathan Diaz is responsible for Cardboard Blake, or at least the physical manifestation of Cardboard Blake. And if you don't know what that is, well, we'll get into it on this episode. But before we just dive straight in, I just want to remind everybody that if you are planning on making any purchases coming up and they are gear related for yourself or a loved one for the holiday season, please, 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 please use the links tonemob.com/Sweetwater for anything Sweetwater carries, or tonemob.com/reverb for anything a little more off the wall. That seriously helps out a ton. And I know you've heard this forever. You've heard me say it. But every time I do say it on the podcast, people go, oh yeah, I almost forgot about that. And then they use it. And it really, really helps out a lot. So there you go. That's the one plug for this episode. Well, until later. But without further ado, let's get into this one with my dude, Scott Hamilton. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes, though probably not today. Almost certainly not today. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today, I have long overdue Mr. Scott Hamilton from the Effects Loop podcast and Aircoustics. How's it going, dude?
It's going all right. I'm having a very Portland-like day in Chicago, I have to say.
Yeah?
I think I brought the weather back with me after I saw you 2 weeks ago.
Did you? Yeah, you look like you got some extra wax in your mustache there, and maybe you're riding around on a bike with a large front wheel, perhaps?
Not that bad. It's just misting rain and 50 degrees. So
okay. Yeah, well, that's pretty Portland, actually. We're not doing too bad in the weather department today. It's a bit damp, but it's nice. It's nice. It's 61, so I'm feeling good.
Wow. It's better than we got.
So
Come on,
Scott,
Chicago, get your act together.
well, if the whole nation's been saying that for years, I don't think it's going to happen at this point.
We've been saying it for years too.
Don't worry, Portland. Portland doesn't have any room to talk. So, but yeah, for the listeners, this has been something that's needed to happen for quite a while. Scott's been a part of the various guitar podcast communities for ever, basically since they were a thing, pretty much. And, you know, he's got his own podcast, but most importantly, he always laughs at us all with our odd acoustic theories because he's actually, what's your official title? Like, I don't want to butcher that too.
You know, it's kind of funny because I got to make up my own title.
Okay.
So it's different on LinkedIn, it's different on Facebook, and it's different everywhere. I say, I'm an acoustics engineer, and that's actually my education is in acoustics and sound, which was part of a pilot program when I was at Purdue. And I lead the Chicago office. I founded it about 3.5 years ago of Air Acoustics, which is a firm I worked for 12 years ago.
Okay.
Out of Toronto, and I was hopping between jobs and getting real tired of the one I was at, or just feeling the need to move. Let's just say that I actually really liked what I did there. I just felt that it was time to leave, and so I called up my old compatriots and said, "Hey, I want to come back, but I want to stay here. How do we make that work?"
Okay. Gotcha. So
Yeah.
they're like, let's start a Chicago office. There's air and acoustics in Chicago. We'll need you to manage all of those things. Right?
Yeah. So fun story. Air Acoustics is actually spelled AERCOUSTICS.
Okay.
As in like aeronautical acoustics.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a made up word, but it's still there. And so a lot of people add an extra O in there to make it aero acoustics. But anyway, it's a running joke we have between me and a few of our other guys of just how many typos we can find in different things. So I mean, even I had an article I was a part of get published last week for what I did over at the Academy Awards Museum. And they spelled their name wrong in it after interviewing me multiple times and all that kind of stuff. So we had to have them correct it. So that was one of our, we found the joke and we called them out on it.
So I wanted to have you on for multiple reasons. Obviously, you've got your own show, which is, has become, I don't know what the best way to describe it is. It's like, there's all podcasters are ragtag, but you're like the head of the crew over there seemingly, but by accident. How did that come about?
So it actually it spiraled off of, so Chris Carter used to do the Carter's Talk Tone podcast.
Yes.
Wanted to be kind of done with it. Like it just kind of ran its course and he's like, I want to reboot it, but I want to do it differently. He pulls Jonathan Diaz in. And then they're like, man, we kind of need someone who knows what they're talking about is I think the kind of phrase, or we need some credibility. And so Diaz is like, let's pull Scott in. And like Diaz and I just became friends through guitar community stuff, meeting at NAMM, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's how I just got connected. And I don't really think of myself as the leader of it, but at some days it kind of feels like that. It just, I seem to be driving a lot just because I kind of have that personality.
Yeah, Diaz is probably gonna get mad at me that I had you on first. I think is probably what's gonna happen. He's gonna really berate me for this because he's the one that for all of the listeners out there who have been with us for a few years, you may remember a cardboard version of me being toted around the Summer NAMM floor, or at least me talking about it. And Diaz was the one that managed that entire operation and gave Cardboard Blake a home for quite a while, at least as far as I'm aware.
So that's actually part of the secret. Maybe we were spilling the beans too early and this should be Patreon content.
Oh, no.
It wasn't just Diaz.
It wasn't just Diaz. Well, he's the only one talked to me about it. Oh, man, there's so many layers to this podcast onion.
There may have been a troll Facebook account that's been haunting you for a long time.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I might have been behind that.
Oh, that was you. I just assumed it was Diaz. Okay.
That's been me this whole time.
So in addition...
Actually, I'm not... And I believe you blocked me from posting in your group on that account recently.
I did?
Or someone did. Yeah, I'm not allowed to post on it anymore.
I didn't do it. Not on purpose, anyway.
I don't know. I tried logging into it for the first time in a year just because I was bored. And yeah, it's like the account's like locked out now and stuff. So
Like,
oh well.
is it locked out as? So let's back up a little bit.
I can log into it. I just can't post. Like my
in the
posts are
tone mod
limited or something
specifically.
like that. Yeah.
Weird. Well, I'll have to investigate that.
It's fine. It's a joke that's ran its course. So maybe we need to.
That's true. Cardboard Blake's head. Well, let's back up a little bit. So not only was there a Cardboard Blake, it wasn't just for no reason. It was a thing that did end up going to charity.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really cool thing, but also it's just a funny thing that everybody remembers is Diaz carrying this Cardboard Blake around NAMM. Actually just talked to Greg Koch on the Chasing Tone podcast, and I was like, "Do you remember?" He's like, "I do remember. That was weird." So I have Cardboard Blake's head around here somewhere because at the last Summer NAMM I was at, Diaz didn't want to give Cardboard Blake a home anymore, and I certainly didn't want to because of the troll account that's been going around for all these years. But I thought it was Diaz. Turns out it was Scott this whole time. Man, comes full circle.
Yeah, it was an out of character thing for me, wasn't it?
It was a little bit. It just definitely seemed like more of a Diaz thing to do, for sure. But hey, you did a good job because I didn't see it coming. Look at that.
Yeah. So we'll start this off with a confessional. Yeah. So the effects loop, check us out. And I guess this is the plug for it. But
there you go.
We just do whatever's new. That's really what we could kind of focus on there. And so it's a little different from a lot of the other podcasts that are more like interview focused, like this one, or like 60 Cycle Hum has their niche with the used gear and all those kind of things. But we tried to find what could we do that was a little different, and that's kind of the format that came out, and it's been fun.
Right on, man.
Gosh,
right
we're
on.
3 years into it now.
That's wild. Has it been 3 years already? Wow.
I think so.
That's crazy.
I think we just had like episode 140 something.
I have to remember that like 2021 is almost over.
I know.
So the last 2 years, I feel like it's not that they don't count, but they almost don't count from a mental perception standpoint because they're the longest and shortest years ever. It felt like we were in a time warp or something. So strange.
Yeah, there's a meme going around where it's like the last week has certainly been a year.
That's very accurate.
I'm as busy as I think I've ever felt, and at the same time, I don't leave my house for like 3 or 4 days at a time. It's a very interesting phase of life we've been in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been hard to get a gauge on anything. It's like, we're recording this right before Halloween, and it's just like, what? It's Halloween. This is odd.
Yeah. Shoot, that's Sunday. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Crazy. But the real reason I wanted to get you on, beyond just talking to you, and like you just were in Portland, we went to a show together, we had a good time. It was actually because of your background. So maybe let's dive into your background and talk about what you do on a professional day-to-day basis. And then I can dive into some other things that I have kind of mentally prepared for you.
Sure. I guess the formal introduction is I'm an acoustics consultant. And I've been doing that for 12 years now, like straight out of school. And so what we do is on a professional level, I focus mainly in architecture, but there's various forms of acoustical consulting that I help people design buildings that sound good. Mm-hmm. Whether it's being managing things like making places quiet, making sure that speech is comprehensible in them, or anything from a concert hall all the way down to literal industrial properties that are next door to people that don't want to hear it, or train tracks, or all those kind of things that you kind of gotta manage the noise side of it, or create a musical environment that's high performing. So I've got a few pretty cool projects under my belt. Not to brag, but like Wrigley Field's renovation here in Chicago was me. I led the acoustics effort on that for phases 1 through 3, and the master planning on that. Done a few concert halls all over the country, such as like the Alliance Theater down in Atlanta, the Bella Concert Hall in Calgary over at Mount Royal University. The new concert hall at University of Wisconsin I was involved in. So all sorts of stuff. It's been pretty
Right
cool.
on. So when you're optimizing a space, like for let's just say like a performance place,
Mm-hmm.
do you have to try to like strike some sort of balance between, say, a musical performance with a full orchestra or a stand-up comedian? Is there like different things to take into consideration, or is it all kind of the same?
I mean, they're wildly different. So nowadays with the economics that they are, and construction's not cheap, land's not cheap. If you're going to build a performance venue, you need one that's open 200 days a year.
Totally.
You can't have, a place that does a show on Saturday and that's the only reason they exist. And so there aren't really purpose-built buildings anymore. Now, there's a few exceptions to that, like the Elba Philharmonie in Germany that just got built. Even that's a multi-use, even though it's a famous like orchestra concert hall.
Mhm.
So naturally, nowadays, the name of the game is how do we make it excellent in both those scenarios? A stand-up comedian needs, frankly, a room that's pretty dry in terms of you can comprehend what's going on, free from distractions, because there's not actually like a stable set of noise
Yeah.
in that area. And then something like a concert hall for whatever city's Philharmonic comes in, that room needs to bloom. It needs to let that sound come out and project. Frankly, no one wants a microphone on stage with any of that. So the room needs to naturally project that sound and distribute it. And it needs to be even. It needs to be a consistent experience for all the patrons. Though that's kind of a lie. Where you sit in the room does matter, especially in natural acoustic environments. Less so in, sound reinforcement systems. And frankly, usually those bands also need to moderately be able to handle a jazz band come in, which is
right.
semi-amplified.
Yep.
It probably will have, if not a singer-songwriter at some point, a full band. The only thing short that probably it won't have is a Metallica or one of those kind of things. Not so much because the room can't support that kind of music, but just simply because the seating arrangement doesn't.
Right. Not great for mosh pits.
So, people don't sit for Metallica.
No, not usually. No.
Though their fans are getting older, so who knows?
There have been some rock bands that have came through the Arlene Schnitzer here in Portland, which is our big concert hall, which is probably relatively small compared to most things. But there's definitely been rock bands come through there. Actually, I saw Merle Haggard there back in the day. That was an interesting show to see there. But it's interesting to think about all the different types of performances and what they require. Like, you don't really want a lot of reverb if you're trying to tell a joke. Everybody
no, I mean, but at the same time, you don't want a dead room.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's aspects there too of how much crowd feedback do you want? Because I mean, this is the classic problem with a lot of concerts these days, at least for me, is I have to wear earplugs at everything now.
Yeah.
Because the sound system has to be so loud because the crowd is so stinking loud.
Yes.
And then there's this battle. You're actually having this volume war between the band and the crowd now, because, back in the day, you hear these stories of the Beatles showing up and no one could actually hear the Beatles because the crowd was screaming so loud.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that give and take, but now we're experiencing, these 115, 120 decibel shows. It's not good for you. You're going to blast out your ears being in that environment.
It's funny that you bring that up specifically, because at the show that you and I were at, that Russ and Kelly show, you probably didn't notice as much because you had earplugs in, but there was a couple behind us that was excessively annoying. Basically, I'll never understand.
Is this the lady who kept dropping her phone?
No, she wasn't.
Okay.
She was just kind of clumsy. No, this is somebody that would have been to your right as you face the stage, but behind you. It was basically just a couple on a date, which there's nothing wrong with that. It was the fact that they needed to go have a discussion there, like a very loud discussion, because there's a band playing, and I'm like, you guys should have went to a dinner, because they're just like, I was this and doing this and this in Nashville, and I would do and I'm like, just shut shut up. No one came. It'd be one thing if you're like singing along with the singer or whatever, but
Oh yeah.
no one came to hear you talk about your day. Those are always the most annoying people at a concert to me. But anyway,
with all due
sidebar.
respect, yeah, I don't think we should talk during concerts at all, but that's me. I will say I've been to shows of all the like, and like, so I go to a lot of formal music as well.
Mhm.
Philharmonic concerts, those kind of things. I try to stay plugged into that world too. Mainly for business reasons. I mean, just simply buttering up these kind of clients and staying in the know with those kind of groups and experiencing how those shows are run. And
Totally.
that helps inform what I do with the design. Even though I'm still, I mean, I'm a praise and worship guitar player at a mega church in Chicago. So like that's where my head starts then with music, and it just goes from there. So when you're at those shows, do not talk. If you're whispering, if you unwrap a cough drop, everyone's staring at you, right?
Right.
And one of the first concert halls I worked on is Corner Hall in downtown Toronto. And that hall is designed where the background noise level is the threshold of human hearing. And I got thrown on the job because I was 22 and I could hear things my boss, who was 60, can't hear anymore.
Right.
Just by natural like
Age.
biology. Yeah. And he's had significant hearing loss and things over the years. So there's stuff like that. But we were actually at the point of, does this light fixture make noise? Can you hear that? Like that's the level we were trying to get the quiet down to. And to be honest, I haven't designed a hall like that since. But sorry, my phone was ringing. I'll turn that up. I'll make sure that's off. That level of quiet forces you to have such a rapt attendance to the show. So I was at the Hard Hat concert, which is just a term basically when you're commissioning a room very early on. They'll host a show for everyone who worked on it.
Okay.
So the architect's there, every contractor's there, everyone from the university or whatever organizations behind it, major sponsors, that kind of stuff. They'll come to a Hard Hat concert, and they had a string quartet, and they were doing a piece, and there was a solo for the violin player. And I remember the soloist finishing their note, letting the bloom happen, and then you literally heard, and you found out
from the player,
creak. Everyone was holding their breath because we were trying to be into this performance. And so those kind of things really do play into what makes a room happen. But yeah, anyway, that's how quiet stuff gets. And that's the level of attention you need to focus on, is like, do your chair squeak? Do all those kind of things? And that's what that type of music demands. And now, I mean, I'm looking at something like what we had at, like, we went to a show, and actually Rustin Kelly wasn't that loud, all things considered.
It really wasn't.
But if you would go see, I don't know, name your current pop act, it would be obscene.
Mm-hmm.
Just how loud it is.
Even going to, it was weird. I really hit the concerts hard once I could. So I went to that Rustin Kelly show. Next weekend, I saw my friends in Keonashi play, and then the weekend after that, I went and saw Thrice, and it was like progressive volume levels. It was like Rustin Kelly wasn't terribly loud. I didn't feel like I needed hearing protection, especially standing in the back where we were. Mm-hmm. Keonashi, I was like, ooh, they're a little bit louder in this venue, and they're a wild band. They're a pretty wild band. And then Thrice at the Roseland, I was like, oh, I should have brought earplugs. Jeez, this is...
Yeah. When I saw Thrice, I wore earplugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I would recommend anybody who's really into music, go buy a pair of... I mean, there's so many different versions of it now, but essentially, like, there's dubs, there's Eros, there's a bunch of different... Atomonix makes a pair. A lot of them are ear filters. They're not true earplugs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so what they do is they have a more balanced taper in terms of how much they shut down sound coming into you, and you can get them at like 10 decibels or 20 decibels instead of, I mean, your foam earplugs are something like 30 decibels of attenuation. So sometimes you're like, yeah, it's too damped, and it's too much. It's too much attenuation coming into your head, and I want to hear it a little bit better. Even though, I mean, I'll also tell people, wear earplugs walking into the show, and your brain will start recalibrating. Oh. So you won't feel like you suddenly just put something over your head and you're shutting it out, because you get that thing. You put earplugs in and all you hear, it just gets really woof, 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 woof.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how everything sounds. If you get the filters, that helps a lot. And it's still loud. It's just not as obscenely loud.
Do you have a preferred brand?
Your best option, they all use kind of like the same filtering element.
Yeah.
So your best option is go to your audiologist, get a mold made with a filter in it for about $50 to $100.
Is that all it is?
Molded to your ear, and that's perfect.
Oh, I'm doing that.
Yep.
I have hearing loss in my family. My dad's ears have been bad. He's literally had hearing aids almost as long as I can remember. And he's only like 50, 55 or something. So he's had hearing aids since his 30s, I think. And my grandpa on his side also. I don't seem to have that genetic hearing loss that they do. But I've always, especially when I was working in like heavier industries, I was always the guy. I'm putting earplugs in when I'm going to hammer on something or whatever. And I've kind of haven't gotten away from that when I'm doing that kind of activity. Cause I'm like, if I'm going to lose hearing, I don't want it to be from a hammer. Mm-hmm. What a lame, lame thing to experience, you know? But I have always struggled with them at concerts, especially because I do like to get a little bit rowdy. And I feel like I've always felt like it's shutting off my experience a little bit, but I know it's not good for my ears, and my ears are how I make my money these days. So I need to protect those things.
Well, and then you have the other fun one. An architect I used to work with pointed this out to me. You know how like if you're at a club, you're at any kind of place, and you can't hear somebody, so you lean into them and you put your ear by their mouth.
Of course.
Whereas that's now someone shouting right at your ear.
Mm-hmm.
So the level that you're exposing yourself to be able to hear over a nightclub is just like, that's the most damaging thing you're doing.
Yeah.
Let alone just like listening to music at any kind of place. I throw nightclubs out just because like that's where I kind of noticed I did that most. Mostly because I'm a 6'7" man trying to talk to girls. So I'm bending over a lot to try to hear them when I used to hang out in those kind of environments. But that hasn't been a problem for a while.
At least 2 years, right? That's not really been an issue, right?
Oh gosh, it hasn't been an issue in like 7 or 8 years, but whatever.
No, I hear you. I hear you. So, excuse me. So, do you have much experience with, you talked about concert halls and things like that a lot. Have you done much with recording studios?
I've done a few. If we got to list credentials here, I did Hubbard Radio in their station renovation here in Chicago. So that would have been the Mix, the Drive, and another, I can't remember what the third station is. And anyway, major radio station here in Chicago, as well as WMBI's whole studio, which is Moody Public Radio. So chances are anywhere you live, there's probably a Moody Radio affiliate. So we did their whole studio suites, as well as a bunch of others all over the place. But so we've done a number of radio, done some amateur stuff. I'm working on a live streaming studio right now. So you name it, throw it at me. We've done it.
You've done it. You've done it all. So this is where I want to get for the audience. Mm-hmm. This is because most of the audience are players that play at home, much like what I'm seeing your setup is on the screen here. It's just like a regular house type situation or room or apartment type situation. Let's just try to make this as general as we can for most people. I know this is really hard to do, but for most people who are just playing in your average bedroom, what's the number one thing they can do in there to make that space? Like the main complaint is always isolation, and I kind of know a little bit about that. But B, just to make it perform as well as it can on, your average budget, I suppose. I know that's a very, very general and vague question.
So let's break it down into 3 different categories. There is room acoustics, i.e., how sound in a room behaves, how it interacts, how effectively how it echoes, or lack thereof echoes. That's one category. There's the noise aspect, which is just simply with the absence of my activity, how loud is the space? What's going on? And then the last one would be your isolation. A lot of people like to use the word soundproofing. That's one of the first myths I like to dispel, is there is no such thing as soundproofing. There is reducing sound. There's no magical material that suddenly stops sound. There's just materials that stop more sound than another.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people like to think there's things like, hey, if I just put these acoustical panels up on the wall, I'm going to soundproof my room. That doesn't work. Oh, if I just put this magic foam in my wall cavities, that's going to work. And that's not really the case. So so there's a lot of, anytime someone starts selling you a magic fix, that's your first sign that you're being kind of conned. Because there's a lot of snake oil in this world. And acoustics is one of those sciences that seems especially prone to snake oil. So it's that's one of those first things that kind of, does it pass the sniff test? And then there are legitimate products out there too. Legitimate companies make great products, and then their marketing team starts throwing all this stuff out, and just starts messing with people too. And so I guess, where do we start? If we're talking a bedroom, honestly, the worst thing, the first thing I would say for most people is, chances are what you're messing with is too big for the space you're operating in.
Okay.
So if you're recording in a bedroom, if you're bringing your Marshall half stack in there, there's not much I can do, because that thing is just loud. There's a fixed loudness that thing creates. So unless I can get that thing quieter, realistically with a normal home, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to make that tame without an attenuator circuit or something like that in that amp.
So when you say like there's not a lot you can do, you're referring to both like the acoustics in the room and the isolation that you're not going to get when you have a Marshall half stack.
I mean, so if we talk about room acoustics, right? So echoing, things like that. It's the persistence of sound in a space. And then there's a coloration of sound that comes with that. It's directly proportional to how big the room is. So the bigger the room, the more echo you have. And it's inversely proportional to how much absorption's in the room, i.e. things that don't reflect sound. It gets into them and it gets dispelled as heat. Most people don't think about that, but your speakers generate heat by because that's what excess energy is.
Right. Friction.
It's literally, actually, it is literally friction happening. It's just, we don't get burned by touching an acoustic panel because we don't think it's not that much energy. It's not like your brake pads or something like that. So with that, we're talking small rooms. So you don't really need much absorption to not have a lot of reverberation in that room. And frankly, most people take advantage of small rooms to just kill all reverberation in a room by saying, let's throw up acoustic foam or acoustical panels or things, anything absorptive. I know a lot of people love to throw carpets or blankets up on a wall. It's tough to actually get any real performance out of stuff like that. Carpeting is not as absorptive at anything low frequency or mid frequency. It's all high frequency absorption because it's really thin. So you don't really, you'll feel like the high end stuff. You'll hear your consonants, things like that kind of dissipate or not get knocked around, but you won't deal with any of the wooliness of bass in a room. Thin blankets on a wall don't do anything, much of anything. If I am hanging something on in a project, nominally, I'm looking at anything from 2 to 4 inches thick when I'm looking at some of these panels and things like that, and they're porous materials, usually fiberglass.
Mm-hmm.
I specify fiberglass, one, because it doesn't light on fire no matter what you do to it. And that's a big factor in my world, is making sure the place doesn't burn down. There's always, like, every couple of years, there's a nightclub that burns down because they use packing foam, which is a oil-based product, lights on fire real easily. You have
Packing
a concert
foam,
next to it, pyrotechnics hit it, whole club's up in flames.
Like packing foam, like what shows up in your box when you order an amp. Like,
oh yeah,
really? Okay,
I've seen that. There used to be a lot more. We call it like the egg crate foam. You've probably seen that in time. People love to put that on walls. It's not good. There are acoustic foams out there. Oralex makes a decent product that is fire rated. However, there's a lot of knockoff Oralex out there in the world too, that is not fire rated. And a lot of people put the knockoff stuff up because they're trying to save money. Again, it's not safe. Not to mention, a lot of that stuff tends to off gas when it's in sunlight. So UV rays will break it down, and it will start off gassing, or the fire retardant material will go away. So you got to be careful with that. For the average person, chances are you're going to want to DIY what you're doing. So your best options are either trying to make a fiberglass panel yourself. Don't handle fiberglass with your bare skin, or you'll be itching for a long time.
Yes.
Mineral wool also works if you don't want to be as itchy. And then you want to fabric wrap it or something like that. You want to make sure that the fabric is breathable. So you don't want to throw something really thick on top of it, because then high frequency sound's not going to go through it. So the easy way, this has been fun with COVID testing and a COVID world, but I was very familiar with what fabrics I could blow through real easily, because that's actually that's my anecdotal test. If someone sends me a 6x6 square of this fabric to test for whatever we're doing, I just stick it up to my mouth and blow through it to see if I can feel my breath on the other side. Mm-hmm. So I had plenty of fabrics around when we had to make our own masks at home that were not good enough to be a COVID mask. But and I actually had a friend or two call me up and say, "Hey, I want to make a fake mask. What do I make the material out of?"
And you're like, "Oh, geez.
I don't really want to tell you that."
Right. Lead. Make it out of lead. Yeah. That'll work.
Well, so that's the best thing. You'll see in most studios and stuff like that, nothing goes over 4 inches. And that's simply because ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, requires that anything more than 4 inches protruding from a wall needs a guardrail, so that anyone who's blind doesn't bump into it.
Oh, really?
So there's a reason. Things like old radiators and stuff like that used to be really thick, and now they're not. That's one of the reasons why.
Okay.
Having said that, the thicker you go, the lower in frequency and more of a bass trap it can become. The other trick to getting more low frequency performance out of something is actually offsetting it from the wall and having an air cavity behind it. Those are sort of those two tricks to kind of really maximize the performance. If you're like, I want something more flexible, go get some velour curtains, hang them up, something like that. That can do stuff too. But if you're using light curtain, it's not going to do much.
So when you say offsetting the panel, first of all, I think we should probably specify, we are kind of talking about panels here, literal rectangle-ish shaped panels most of the time.
Yeah, they actually need to be big. That's another common thing that people don't realize is a lot of people will buy these 1x1 squares and then they'll scatter them. They actually need to be clustered together to be effective.
Okay, that makes sense. So when you were talking about spacing them off the wall, are you talking about it would be better to have a 3-inch panel spaced an inch off of the wall, or would it be better to have a full 4-inch panel?
I don't have a cut sheet in front of me. I don't actually know which one's better.
Okay.
But say you can only buy a 2-inch panel. If you put a 2-inch air gap behind it, it's going to be more effective than if it's flat mounted right on the wall.
Gotcha. So if you are limited by what you just have, then it's better to put an air gap there. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I'll also say a lot of people tend to overdo it when it comes to acoustic paneling and things like that. Everyone errs on the side of let's make this place like a movie theater where it is just dry and dead. And a lot of us actually do like reverberant rooms. Mm-hmm. So you gotta find your balance. But it's important to know too, look, if you're playing guitar in your bedroom and you're annoying your parents, putting acoustic panels up on the wall isn't going to fix anything.
Right. Now that is something I did know, and I have tried to tell people in various forums over there, just get some egg foam or get something that won't make your significant other any happier. It won't. They are still going to hear everything. It will make your room sound different. I've heard people say that too. Well, we put it up and it sounds different in the room. Well, sure. If you cover it head to, from floor to ceiling in something, it probably will change how it sounds. But that doesn't mean that sound isn't still going through the wall. And specifically, the bass frequencies are much harder to control. Like you were talking about, diffusing those in the room. That's what goes through the wall, right? The bass frequencies.
It goes through easier, yeah. But you have the other factor to think about here is audibility is really, if that's the concern you have here, when we talk about soundproofing again, air quotes, audibility is a combination of multiple factors. It's 1, how loud something is. 2, how loud it is where the person's hearing it, because that matters a lot in terms of what's masking it or covering it up. You don't hear things that are quieter than what's already going in your room. sort of. There's caveats there, but for general purposes here,
Right.
if I'm blasting my TV, I don't hear my neighbors talking. Right.
Of course. Yeah.
I can hear my neighbors talking when they're yelling at each other and I'm trying to work on a Zoom call. But if I'm blasting music in my place, I don't hear them because I'm masking that sound that's coming through. It has nothing to do with them.
Kind of like white noise machines when you're trying to sleep. It just kind of blocks out other stuff.
Well,
and that other stuff is still there.
I guarantee you there's a number of people who are listening to this at work that are hearing a white noise machine right now too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a super common thing in a lot of offices that people will just put a bunch of white noise machines all throughout, or they'll put music, or if there's someone who like me is involved, we'll try to actually design the HVAC system to make a bit of noise. We won't try to shut up the HVAC system completely because you want masking in your life. Because you want privacy. You don't want to hear everything going on. You don't want to hear your neighbor chewing gum at the desk next to you. And if you ever have a job where you're at a place where it's dead silent, you hear every click and clack of their keyboard. You hear them messing with their pens. You hear them breathing. That person annoys the heck out of you. So, and I've had an office like that. So it you got to design within that reason. And then, so loudness of the source, loudness of the receiver area. And then what's the wall doing in between?